This program is brought to you by the partners of A Rood Awakening International. Help others find truth. Support A Rood Awakening International today.
Do you ever have the feeling that there's a destiny put inside you by heaven that you've just never realized? Like maybe being a business owner. Maybe you think that's not for you, but what if being an entrepreneur is what God has always wanted for you? What if it was actually the destiny of all believers to be the business owners and never the employee? Is that even possible? Our guest tonight definitely thinks so. So tonight we're going to talk about success as a believer. Not about money, but a destiny for the rest of your life. And it's the perfect time to do it because it's the end of the sixth day. The sun is set, and this is Shabbat Night Live.
Be a great show tonight.
It will be.
Stand by, studio. 30 seconds.
Thank you. One minute's air, Michael.
Oh, thanks.
All right.
Thanks, Ellie.
Well, Shabbat Shalom, Torah fans. Speaking of the Torah, what do Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Daniel, King Solomon, and you have in common? Well, the potential to serve Yehovah and be wildly successful at the same time. It is possible, and it is not a sin. In fact, our guest tonight has a very good reason to believe that it is your destiny as a believer to be the head and not the tail, especially when it comes to making a living for your family. Syndicated radio host, author, and entrepreneur Josh Tolley joins us tonight for the first of 2 episodes in a very different series here on Shabbat Night Live called Faith and Finances. You can order the DVD, Blu-ray, or audio USB right now. You pre-order, that is, or you can watch it unfold for the next 2 weeks right here on the program. And speaking of weeks, let's find out where we are on the astronomically and agriculturally corrected biblical Hebrew calendar. Today is the 3rd Shabbat in the Hebrew month of Shavat. Now, there's something interesting. Do you know that it was in this month in history when Yeshua was baptized? Yes, this early in the year. It seems kind of strange to be at this time of year, but it is true. And you can discover more about this calendar and pre-order one for yourself for next year at aroodawakening.tv/calendar, and they will arrive at Passover time. Now, before we can talk about our guest tonight, please welcome my co-host, the Director of Ministry Development for Rood Awakening International, Anny Reed.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Anny.
It's an exciting time to be here.
Isn't
have
it?
An awesome topic that we are talking or discussing with Josh Tolley for the next 2 weeks, which is all about money.
Yes.
Weird, right?
Yeah, it's not even really about money, is it? It's about success and realizing your destiny because yes, it involves money because, success and money can help you do many things in life, like support ministries and help other people and all these kind of good things. And Josh brings out some interesting things about that, so I don't want to give away his topic. But yeah, it's more about stepping into what Yehovah has always intended for us, and I've never heard it the way that Josh tells it.
Well, there's 2 major prayer requests that everybody submits. One of them is health, and the other one is always money related, finance related. And we see it here on our prayer requests that we receive on a daily basis. But it's a topic that we want to tackle because it is so important to our lives. We need it every single day, and everything that we do, it's all centered around money. And as believers, I agree, we're supposed to be the head and not the tail. We're supposed to be leaders. We're supposed to be business owners. We're supposed to be the lenders, not the borrowers. We're supposed to be out of debt. There's so much in the Bible that, outlines our relationship with money and our relationship with God. So I'm gonna stop preaching and let Josh do the rest this evening for you. But he has some very practical methods that you can use on a daily basis for you and your family to be self-sufficient.
Right, and tonight we're going to talk about even where did the idea of money come from. That's where we're going to start with this. Anny and I had the privilege of interviewing Josh ourselves on the stage, so you'll see that in just a few minutes. But it's just fascinating. Both of us were just totally enthralled because we're both very much interested in what he has to say, not just sitting here being polite to him. We're actually asking him questions.
Yeah, we actually said, Michael, please led us tonight.
Yeah.
We really wanted to talk to Josh because, it's something, again, that affects you on a daily basis, and he just uses practical methods to help you get from point A to point B. So you'll find out what my dream is for later in life,
yes.
and what Josh's suggestion is for me to get there. But again, it was very practical, and I had never thought of it. So it's an incredible series.
Take notes, and like we said before, get the series, because you're going to want to watch this over and over again. It's very inspiring. It will empower you. It made me realize that, God has got this plan for me and for you, just sitting there waiting for you to jump on it. And maybe what Josh is going to say to you tonight and next week is going to have you jump on it. So exciting stuff.
We certainly hope so. And take advantage. This month, it's February 2nd. The entire bookstore is 15% off.
Right, and I brought some things here that you could get.
Now, after Shabbat.
After Shabbat, yes, you always want to shop after Shabbat.
Yes, let's not do it on Shabbat, but after Shabbat, yes, everything.
Everything. In fact, you could even we always discount the pre-order of any series we have on Shabbat Night Live, but you could even get 15% off this if you want.
Wow, and it's brand new?
That's right. You could get a shofar.
And now we carry extra large jumbo shofars.
Yes, this is not one of them. This is one of the smaller ones. But you could get new products even that we've got, like the Health Awakening show, the whole series there, the brand new Red Sea Crossing that you've been hearing about last couple of weeks, the Chronological Gospels large print edition. You can get 15% off that.
Now that one is a worthy buy, for sure.
And in fact, remember, Michael just created this University of Life bundle,
which is your Torah 101, 201, 301, and 401.
Right, so that would be in order: creation versus fake science, Passover, the path to freedom, lessons on the way to Sinai, and Judges, the king is coming. You could get that at 15% off. And I believe that this is already discounted at 50% of the value.
Oh, wow, so it's 65.
Yeah, you'll be getting an incredible deal out there. So take advantage of it. Go in the store, shop around, have some fun there.
Yes.
Now, the new calendar, speaking of stuff that's in the store, it's called The Secrets of Revelation. You'll see it on your screen here. That's what it looks like right there. You might remember that picture. Where from? It's from the Chronological Gospels Season 2, also about Revelation. And what we did in this calendar is we went through the Chronological Gospels. As you know, Michael includes the 4 Gospels, along with Acts and Revelation, also in there, because he considers Revelation the 5th Gospel, with very good reasons, which you can read for yourself in the Chronological Gospels. And the secret to, or the thing that makes a Chronological Gospel special, is all these special notes that Michael puts in there from extra biblical sources, and he puts all the pieces of the puzzle together for you to help you understand the background of whatever you're reading in the Bible. Like, for example, when it comes to Revelation, the seed of Satan, the parable of the little scroll, probably never heard that before. All kinds of things like this that bring the book of Revelation to life and help Michael have the book of the Revelation as the easiest book in the Bible for him to understand, which still blows me away.
I know, but it will make sense. So if you have not had an opportunity to watch Season 2 of the Chronological Gospels, you will want to take advantage of being able to view that. We do it absolutely free. It's available on our YouTube, on michaelrood.tv and on roodawakening.tv. But we also have Season 1 now available. We took it down for some re-editing, and it's now available on YouTube again, michaelrood.tv and on Rood Awakening. But you don't want to miss out on this calendar. Our calendar, if you don't mind showing, this is our last year's calendar. Now remember, our year begins in the spring.
Yes.
With the sighting of the new moon in the month of the Aviv, which is generally end of March, beginning of April.
Right. Now, this is what this one looked like right here.
Yes. And so you want to take advantage of our calendar, because in them there's awesome notes. There's incredible teachings like the Secrets of Revelation, and there's coupons, which is where you found out about our 15% off sale of the bookstore.
Now, to get that, we should tell you, it's not just automatically 15% off. You have to put a code in when you go to the store. So remember, Feb 15, F-E-B as in February 15, Feb 15, and then you'll get the deal off there. Now, you mentioned prayer requests just a little while ago, Annie, and we actually have a couple in front of us, don't we?
We do. Again, health and finances. That's usually our top 2.
We've got one right here, as a matter of fact, with finances. But
and I have one for health.
Go ahead.
So, Jim asks that he wants to thank first and foremost those that prayed for him as he is suffering from cancer.
Okay.
But he wanted to update us that he's now healing, and he's searching for a temporary job.
Good.
So we do want to pray for Jim that he finds a place. He wants a job that will help him pay for his mortgage and credit card bills and such, so that he finds a job where he can use his God-given talents for His glory and somewhere that is going to provide more than enough.
Well, Jim, I hope you're watching tonight because you might just have some inspiration from Josh. That's the truth. And from James tonight, please pray for my kids and work as many attacks are coming at me. I want to pay off my bills. There we go again. I want to pay off my bills and not be concerned about rent. Please pray that many people will be saved today and that love will abound. So James's thoughts are not just for him, but for everyone watching the show.
That's
so
right.
Yes, James, we'll pray for you as well.
And Joan here, please pray for my daughter who was diagnosed with a serious health problem. She is a mother of 2 children.
Okay.
So
short and sweet, yeah. And if you go to our prayer page, roodawakening.tv/prayer, you don't have to give a lot of details. Just be very short and simple like Joan did, or you could tell your whole story if you need to. And when people pray for you, you'll know. You'll get an email. When they check, I prayed for this, you'll get an automatic email, and you'll know that have that comfort that folks are praying for you, which we're going to do right now.
would you mind praying for us, Scott?
Sure, absolutely. Why don't you join us? Yehovah, thank you for these folks who have submitted these prayer requests, Father. We know that sometimes it just takes a humbling to admit that, yes, we need prayer and please help me, and just throwing it out there for anyone to help. So we want to pray for James and for Joan and for Jim as well, Father. There's finances and expenses related to healing and to sickness. So we just pray for all of these folks, Father, that you would just answer their prayer, first of all, for their healing. And then secondly, Father, that they would walk into their destiny with a body being whole into what you want them to do. And Father, I pray that the message tonight from Josh would edify those watching and these folks as well who have submitted prayer requests so that they could see that they are the head and not the tail. And most often it's a mindset that's keeping us back. So help us to have the proper mindset that you have always intended for us, and that is one of faith and just to follow you in what you want us to do and for us to walk in it. So Father, we just pray for that bravery for these folks, and we pray for your healing for those who need healing. In Yeshua's name, amen.
Amen. That was awesome.
Well, let's hope we hear some testimonies, and you can also submit a testimony, roodawakening.tv/testimonies. We always love to hear those because that is the proof for folks who are submitting prayer requests that, yes, God's going to answer them. It just helps them feel better about their prayer requests. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, if you have a testimony, we'd sure love to hear it.
Yes, and also speaking of very exciting things coming around the corner. We do have Passover that's just around the corner.
Yes.
It's only a few weeks away. I think we counted less than, around 7, 8 weeks.
Yes, it's coming
today.
quick.
So it's really scary for us here in the office because it's crunch mode, but it's really exciting for us too because we have the opportunity to meet you. And hopefully you can attend, join us. We'd love to have you. We have incredible teachers, praise and worship. We have great programs for your children and youth, and just lots of fellowship time. For many of us, we don't have a big fellowship group. I was actually thinking about that this past weekend, about fellowship. Even for us here in Charlotte, where you think that it's the Messianic Disney World, we're a very small group, and we crave fellowship as much as you do. And so this is a great time for you to meet like-minded believers, have awesome conversation, and hopefully make friends for a lifetime.
And you might even realize that there's an Aviv fellowship near you. Go to Passover, you might cross paths. I mean, that's happened more often than not.
Yes.
Yehovah has people cross paths at Passover and say, well, I've got an Aviv fellowship. And this other person says, well, I live 15 miles from there. I had no idea. So it's a great place to connect with folks and network, to use a business term, and just connect with people and figure out where you can have Shabbat with like-minded believers.
So please visit PassoverCharlotte.com. Time has come, it's getting short. We want you to be there. We want to have the opportunity to fellowship with you.
Yes.
And also, we do have a new monthly love gift,
Yes.
which I'm very excited about. It's the first time we've ever done this in the history of this ministry. But Michael was he was just so inspired by Bill Cloud's recent teaching that he wanted Bill to step in and do this month's love gift.
Yes, it is. The Spirit of Esau. This is not a teaching from Michael. It is a guest teaching from Bill Cloud. So.
Now, the teaching is, you know the story of Jacob and Esau. And so what Bill does is he gives you the historical aspect of that teaching, and then he uses it to let us know where we are today in prophecy. And Michael, Michael's feeling on prophecy. He feels it's very important to always be watchful of what's going on. It was set for a reason and a purpose. So we're excited about Bill being able to do this with us. Michael is just in all of his teaching. He loves it.
It's a great teaching. I've watched it.
is.
It's great. So the Spirit of Esau, you get that with a donation of $50. We will give this to you as our gift for supporting the ministry. And for $100, we'll give you the teaching plus Bill's book, which is also related to the teaching, called Esau Rising. And
a beautiful piece.
beautiful mezuzah. This is a mezuzah. This is where you put the commandments on your doorpost as it's commanded in Scripture, literally.
Yeah, I have one at home.
Yeah, some people have several all over the doorposts of their home. And this one is called the 12 Tribes of Israel mezuzah because it has 12 stones that represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And so you get all 3 of these pieces for a donation of $100 or more. We'll send that to you just as a thank you for supporting A Rood Awakening. Now, coming up in just a few minutes, the first episode of Faith and Finances with Josh Tolley. Josh's big message in this teaching is we're probably more concerned about love, the love of money, when we don't have enough. Interesting. As opposed to having an abundance when we can give it away freely. So giving freely is something both Anny and I wholeheartedly believe in, and we hope you do too, because that's the only way you're going to see this program right now on Shabbat Night Live, to be honest. Shabbat Night Live may come into your home for free, but people have made it their full-time job to bring this program to you. They have families to feed just like you do. So if you are enjoying this program, please consider blessing those who make it happen. You can even get that new love gift we just talked about. Just go to aroodawakening.tv/lovegift.
Good and evil are constantly at war within each of us, and the one we allow to lead our thoughts and emotions will ultimately determine our destiny. In a special guest teaching, available only in February, Bill Cloud presents The War Within Us and the War Around Us in The Spirit of Esau.
The story of Jacob and Esau is not just about 2 men who lived a long time ago, but it's actually establishing a pattern for us. It's helping us to see the 2 opposing forces in the world.
The Spirit of Esau is a special teaching that is not on YouTube and it's not available for sale. But we'll send you this exclusive teaching as our thanks for your love gift donation of just $50.
If we're not careful, that Esau within us, that evil inclination, wants to rise up and dictate what we do, tell us how we think.
In addition to this special teaching, we'd also like to give you 2 more gifts. With a donation of $100 or more, we'll send you the teaching, plus Bill Cloud's best-selling book, Esau Rising, and the 12 Tribes of Israel mezuzah. Hang the mezuzah in your doorway as a reminder to live your life as a member of God's family, Israel. Make your donation now, $50, $100 or more, to receive these special gifts. The Spirit of Esau collection is available only in February.
Jacob is a pattern for you and I to look at in the sense that this is what we're called to do. When we're born again, this is who we're to be.
Get these special gifts now as a constant reminder of who you are in Messiah. The born-again spirit that is Jacob versus the desires of the flesh personified in Esau. Act now to receive the Spirit of Esau teaching, plus Bill Cloud's book, Esau Rising, and the 12 Tribes of Israel mezuzah. Call or visit our website to make your love gift donation now.
So you've started diving into the Bible and realize it's not all you thought it was. And now you're beginning to think, am I crazy? Am I the only person that thinks this in the entire world? No, not true. In fact, we have someone here to help you with that transition, Matthew Hall. Welcome, Matthew.
Hey, Scott. Good to be here.
Now, we all wear many hats here at A Rood Awakening, and one of your hats is the Director of Aviv Fellowships. Now, before we get into that, tell people a little bit about yourself.
Well, originally, I was a youth pastor at a local church, actually the church I grew up in. My mom and dad were married in that church, and I was kind of being groomed to be the next pastor of that church. So it was kind of one of those real awkward situations when I started digging a little bit deeper into truth. And basically, long story short, what happened was I met my wife, and she, her and her parents had a radio station, or a radio show, and it was called Family Talk. And so people would call into the show, and one time somebody called in and they said, do you guys believe in the 10 Commandments? And they said, yeah, well, of course we do. And then they said, well, what about the 4th one? Do you guys believe in that one? So that kind of spurred on, they went home. Well, let us get back to you on that. It's kind of, caught them off guard. And So they went home, they studied all the scriptures in Sabbath, and then decided, we really need to take this serious. So they started keeping the Shabbat. Then, here I am living my little life as a pastor and a big youth group and, going to conferences and doing all these different things. And so I meet her and we just kind of hit it off, and I didn't know about the whole Sabbath thing. And so we started getting to know each other better, and I started asking questions. She started sharing these things, and of course, she's scared that I'm going to run away, once I find out about all these things, because the consequences that are involved, we'll get into that in a little bit.
Yes.
But, so basically, I just said, this makes sense. I get it. It clicks. Well, one thing led to another, and it was a conflict of interest. The leadership wasn't on board with the direction I was going. And so then I had to basically put in my resignation and, move down whatever the path was that the Father had for me. So that kind of brought me to a period of our lives where we were kind of alone and didn't have much fellowship and didn't know where to go and what to do. And we were learning all these new things. We were at home just studying the Bible, which it was kind of a good season in a lot of ways. It brought us together as a family. And then but at the same time, it was kind of a lonely period. It was a dark period. And then we prayed one day and just said, Father, we feel like you have something more for us. We want to get back into the ministry. And one thing led to another. And we ended up here in Charlotte and working for Rood Awakening, and which was kind of a dream come true, because it was Michael who originally introduced us to the feasts and the biblical perspective on holidays and all those different things. And so here we are. It's like I win in the lottery. I leave the Christian church and the ministry. Have this really kind of Joseph period in my life where we're just we feel like we were thrown into the pit. We were abandoned by all our family and friends. And then, we're going to Egypt and we're learning all these things, and Father finally just breaks free and sends us down here to work for the guy who actually brought us into this whole thing.
Amazing.
So it was just an amazing testimony. So
now your period of just being alone, I think that's the experience of a lot of people who first find the truth, is because they've grown up with all these people around them at church or whatever, and then everybody thinks, oh no, you're denying the Messiah, and they push you away. They want nothing to do with you. And so you came knowing that whole process and seeing that happen with people who started following Michael Rood's teachings, and you wanted to help, and you created something called Aviv Fellowships. It's based on cell groups, is that right?
Well, when I had my experience in the church, one of the things that I noticed in doing conferences and learning how the different strategies within the church, how do you grow a church, how do you keep people in the church, the thing that we kept coming back to is cell groups or small groups or home groups or whatever people like to call it. And there was something about that dynamic. There was something about that format. And so it really, I became passionate about that. And so I kind of brought that with me. And then as, having lived that time of loneliness and darkness of just feeling empty, because it is, I think a lot of people and people, out there who are going through this transition, a lot of people don't take the jump into truth because there's so many, when you say to somebody, you probably shouldn't do Christmas anymore. Well, that person says, well, but what about my family? I mean, I have all these emotions and all the get-togethers, and everybody's gonna. And then you say, well, it's not Easter, it's Passover. And then they say, well, but what about, so there's so many emotions that are attached to this disconnect. And so you leave, and it's almost like you're in oh God, what's that movie? I can't remember the movie. Maybe it's Judge Dredd or something like that, where there's this big wall, and then out is the desert. And you get banished out into the desert, and you don't know which direction to go. You don't know where the water hole is. You don't know any of that stuff. And you're hoping you just find some sort of group of like-minded people who are trying to survive in the desert at the same time, and try to come up with something that's similar to what you had. And so I really got a passion about it. And when we started working here, I kind of brought it up to Michael and to the leadership. And I said, I really feel like that there's people out there that need some sort of structured framework that helps people step up to the plate, create an environment for people to learn, put themselves out there, so that people can find them. Which is what we kind of put out as the website and the fellowship finder, and give a way to facilitate this, but then let them lead it and take their journey. And And then one thing led to another, and it just exploded. We had a beta group, and they all just kind of loved it, and it started popping up, and then people were finding us on the internet, and it just took on a life of its own. And it really is become something that we want to put more time into, and we really want to see grow and become more effective.
So it's avivefellowships.com. Now, I think people need to understand, this is not the Church of Michael Rood. This is basically a means for people who have like-minded beliefs to get together, and it's really a bunch of cell groups.
Right.
And that's where the real change happens. I mean, that's...
Well, it's, we look back at the life of Yeshua, and we look at... the disciples and the dynamic, the culture, what was happening. Well, here you've got a bunch of guys who meet the Messiah, and he says he's the Messiah, and they're trying to believe he's the Messiah, but they've got this picture in their head. But what are the core components in that? Well, the core components are they're eating together, they're walking together, they're going places, they're hanging out. I don't like the term clique, but they are kind of like they're this group of people who trust each other. They're intimate with each other on an emotional level, and they're sharing their life's challenges and the things they're up against. And we want to try and recreate that, because that's where healing takes place. That's where those intense prayer services happen, where you've got the assembly and you've got the big gathering that everybody knows about from going to church. And then you come into the Hebrew roots and understanding the Torah and different things. You don't fit into that big gathering anymore.
Right.
And so you don't know where to go. And so you can only get so much. And I know from my church experience, I only got so much from a Sunday service. There was a great worship. It was like clockwork. You show up, you say hi to a bunch of people, you shake hands, you get your coffee, you sit down, you stand up, you do your worship service. Then they got the guy that comes up and does the announcements. And then, the pastor gets up and says a few things and preaches this message, and everybody says amen. And then they get done and they figure out where they're going to go out to eat. And it's just like... every week, it's like this clockwork, which it's not a bad thing. And I think the gathering in the assembly is meant to really, encourage people. But it's what happens in the house on a Wednesday night when there's 15 people there, and so-and-so is going through a divorce, or somebody lost a baby, or they're just, those intimate things that you can't just bring up on a stage on a regular service. So we're trying to recreate that, like the times of Yeshua, where people can get together, they can pray for one another, they can get out an acoustic guitar and sing songs, and it's just really what we're trying to create is that more home group environment.
Now, we're going to have another Q&A session where we're going to explain how to do this and where to get started and what kind of benefits you can get. But for now, where can people go to even just get their feet wet? Where do they learn about this? Where can they go online?
Well, my recommendation is that you guys go to avivefellowships.com, and what they're going to do there is they're going to go to the About section, and then once you go to the About section, you're going to go down to Who We Are. That's one page, and then there's the mission statement page.
All right.
And so that's going to have everything they need to know about what we do. There's some videos on the website, and I say just kind of browse through, figure out what it's all about, and then we'll talk more about what the next step is.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Matthew. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
All right, so Matthew Hall, director of Aviv Fellowships. Find out more about how to get connected with folks who believe like you do at avivfellowships.com, and we'll have more on another Q&A segment about Aviv Fellowships. Every Passover, we commemorate the Last Supper. But the Last Supper is just the beginning. A Rood Awakening International presents Passover 2018 live in Charlotte, North Carolina. Enjoy an amazing Passover feast and learn what lies ahead in biblical prophecy all weekend long from some of the most well-known teachers of the end times. Keynote speaker, Perry Stone. Biblical prophecy and Islam expert, Joel Richardson. From Shorshim Ministries, Bill Cloud. From Love for Yeshua Ministries, Chris Knight. And your host, the biblical chronologist, Michael Rood. Enjoy praise and worship music, children's ministry, and youth ministry. Plus, take part in the mikvah, the ancient biblical version of baptism, and the heartfelt family ceremony dating back to the Israelites, the redemption of the firstborn. You'll even learn how to make unleavened bread like they do in the Middle East. One ticket gives you all of this, all weekend long. Passover, live in Charlotte, North Carolina. Get tickets now at PassoverCharlotte.com. The Bible says that the love of money is the root of all evil. But you don't have to be rich to love or be concerned about money. Do you worry about losing your job? Are you concerned about having enough?
Would you like to give more to ministries but just can't?
If you're an employee, then every night on the nightly news and they say the economy is bad, I'd worry a little bit. But when you're an entrepreneur, there's nothing to worry about because entrepreneurs create the economy.
In an eye-opening series on Shabbat Night Live, syndicated radio host, entrepreneur, and best-selling author Josh Tolley reveals the truth that believers are meant to be financial leaders and how to do it.
So when people say, oh, are you preaching be rich? Not even close. What I'm preaching is stop letting money control you.
Order Faith and Finances with Josh Tolley right now on DVD, Blu-ray, or USB. You'll get both episodes as seen on Shabbat Night Live. Order Faith and Finances now by phone or online.
The last night that Yeshua was with his disciples, the Last Supper before the Passover was sacrificed, he took bread and he took wine. He said before that Abraham saw his day and rejoiced. But what does that mean? He saw his day and rejoiced. Well, it was the Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, that brought forth bread and wine to Abraham. He blessed the Most High with the blessing that Abraham taught Yitzhak, Yitzhak taught Yaakov, and is still spoken today. Whenever bread and wine is served at a Jewish table, whenever it is Sabbath, especially around the world, the bread and the wine are brought forth with this blessing. Baruch atah Yehovah, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pari hagafen. Blessed are you, Yehovah, our Elohim, King of the universe, the creator of the fruit of the vine. And Yeshua then said, blessed are you, Yehovah, our Elohim, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. He said, this represents my body, which will be broken for you. This represents my shed blood that pays the sin penalty because of the broken covenant. As often as we do this, we do this in remembrance of him. So break the bread, share the wine, and we do this in remembrance of him until he comes.
Welcome back to Shabbat Night Live. Tonight you are in for a treat because we are going to answer some questions you've had for your whole life. For example, what is the meaning of life? Where does money come from? Why does money cause divorce? What are the 4 types of people? And are all of those people destined to be entrepreneurs? Good questions, and we have a great guest to answer those questions. He is an author. He is a national syndicated radio host. And Anny, what else? I mean, your family's been involved in entrepreneurship, but what else is our guest done?
No, he's a teacher. He's a motivational speaker. He's a mentor of mine, somebody that I greatly respect. And so we have Josh Tolley. We're so excited to have you join us right now.
Pleasure. It is a pleasure.
Especially during this time of year. It's the beginning of our fiscal year for a lot of business owners, but it's also the time that we budget for vacations and we start considering life, those New Year's resolutions.
And maybe you want to do something different this year, do something better than you did last year, right?
We should always want to be better than last year.
We should. You know, then what's interesting about that, that's actually what got me started. I remember I was sitting across the table from a couple in their 30s, and they went to bed every night thinking, is this all my life is? And so many believers, year after year, is this it? Is this really all that God had for me? So yeah, I completely agree. Great time to bring up this topic.
So what is money? Where did money come from?
Well, it's interesting. You know, money is something that we have a lot of opinions on. It's one of those 3 things that you're not supposed to talk about: politics, religion, and money. And money is one of those. And because we have such a daily need and use of it, a lot of us form opinions that are kind of contrary to what it's really supposed to be. So if we look at the history of money, it was just supposed to be a medium that represented something else. So let's say, Scott, you made pottery, and you made furniture, and I had farm eggs. Well, if we were going to engage in commerce, I would have to bring all of my eggs to see you every time in hopes that you wanted them, and then that would get labor intensive. And you'd have to bring your furniture every time we traveled, so you need a truck to bring it all with you. So people realized quite quickly, this isn't the way to do it. So they used money, which at the time was either rice, grains, seashells. We've used sticks in the past.
Wow.
But we use this medium that represents something else. And that was the way it was for a very long time. And all money really is it's a medium of exchange between people engaged in commerce. Now, in the past 100 years or so, we've had a third-party element valuing it for us, which some people think is bad, some people think is okay. But either way, we get the value from another entity, but we still engage in it. All it is a representation of something larger. Money in and of itself really is nothing, which is why God talks about it so much, because he wants us to have a proper understanding that it isn't something in and of itself. It is just a tool that represents something else.
That leads to another good question. As Christians, should we care about money? Should we even have money? What is our relationship supposed to be like with money?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of Christians love to say money doesn't matter, but it does to God. God talks more about money than he does salvation. He talks more about how to spend it than he does heaven. So if it was important to God, important enough to put in Holy Scripture, then we at least have to get to this point where we say it's supposed to matter. I think where we've gone wrong is in Christendom. We've gotten either prosperity gospel, which is some sort of weird, buy my magic handkerchief, become a millionaire, or some poverty gospel where money doesn't matter at all, but don't forget to tithe on your way out the door. So we've gotten these two crazy extremes, and gone is what God actually wanted us to see in it. And it was a tool, a medium of exchange that allows his people to further themselves. And he's never hated it, contrary to what Christianity has kind of adopted. He's never hated money. Think about it. As soon as Adam and Eve left the garden, he gave them a way to provide for themselves, a provision, which means there had to be a way for exchange. And he even knew that, which is why we see Cain and Abel giving sacrifices. You sacrificed something that was important, in this case, a blood offering or something, or a first fruits. Well, that was money. They used grain and sheep as a way to exchange. So even that first sacrifice, even though a lot of Christians don't want to admit it, that has an element of being money in it just from the very beginning. And then we see the Hebrew slaves leave Egypt, and does God say, just leave all your stuff behind? No. He says, not only are you going to take your stuff, you're going to take all theirs too. Mm-hmm. So if money's not important, then why does God continually use it from Genesis to Revelation?
Do you think it's a misunderstanding of where people say, well, money is the root of all evil, and that's not even the right quote?
No.
Is that where we get,
Oh my gosh. I am so glad you brought that up, because what this reveals to us is a lot of Christians, unfortunately, and even more unfortunate, a lot of Christian pastors, wouldn't be able to pass a third grade English class. And I don't say that mockingly. I remember in third grade English that the teacher would give you a sentence and a red pencil and say, circle the action word. Well, most Christians would circle the word money. Well, the action word in that sentence is love, the love of money. So we have to take a look and say, well, what is love, right? Like that 80s song, what is love? but in reality, when we look at love, love is something like, let's say you love your spouse to be. You spend as much time with them as possible. Mm-hmm. You think about them all the time when you're not with them. When they're mad at you, it ruins your day, right? Yeah. Well, now let's replace spouse or loved one or fiance with money. How do you love money? You spend all of your time making it. You think about it all the time. When it's not happy with you, i.e. debt, it ruins your day. So a lot of us love money in our poverty. And we love to pass it off and say, well, I don't love money. I don't have a lot. Irrelevant. He didn't say those who have a lot is the root of all evil. He says the love of money is the root of all evil. And it comes as a shocker to many believers that we are loving money in our poverty.
We just had church people.
Preach it.
No, but really, money is a subject that many people are scared about.
Oh, yeah.
Especially as believers. And we don't want to be judged by one another. And it's almost like, well, a taboo subject, like you said, like politics. So my question is, where did the biblical let me ask this. What is our current economy?
Okay.
And then what was it supposed to be? What is the biblical economy?
That is such a great question, because it's actually more than one answer. See, a lot of people don't even understand what the economy is. We turn on the nightly news and they say the economy is good or they say the economy is bad. But I actually taught a class. Everybody in the room had an MBA, all MBA graduates. And I asked them what the economy was, and none of them had an answer. And I thought, wait a second, if you're all MBAs, Masters in Business Administration, and you don't know what the economy is, then what are we even doing here? Like, how are we saying, oh, the economy's bad, I shouldn't get a house? So I started asking just general people on the street, what's the economy? Oh, well, it's the thing with the money, and sometimes it's good. Okay, Can you take me to it? Can you show me this economy? And well, how do you know if it's good or bad? The guy in the news told you? So what we need to realize is the economy is really just like a thermometer. It's a test to gauge how much exchange is happening. The more exchange that is happening for the mutual benefit of the person selling and the person buying, the greater the economy. But that means we don't have one. We have millions. So let's say there's the American economy. It's good, it's bad, hey, whatever. But if you just got fired, your economy is terrible. If your city just got a bunch of new entrepreneurs to do startups, the city economy might be great, but statewide it might be terrible. So we need to realize that our economy really starts at home. How are we doing? And this is what I liken it to. Whenever we worry about the economy, we have to treat it like we're on an airplane. When I came out to see you guys, I got on an airplane, and they said in the case of an emergency, oxygen masks will deploy from the ceiling. Put your oxygen mask on first. So whenever we say, well, is the economy bad? The first place you have to look is inside your door. If inside your door, the economy's not bad, okay. But here's the other part of that. We're not supposed to walk in fear.
That's right.
So when the television tells us the economy's bad, why does everybody get afraid? And to be honest, great economic opportunity is present when the economy is bad. Because when the bad economy exists, it allows entrepreneurship to thrive. And this is what I love to explain to people. If you're an employee, then every night on the nightly news and they say the economy is bad, I'd worry a little bit. But when you're an entrepreneur, there's nothing to worry about because entrepreneurs create the economy. Every situation, every culture, every political system, entrepreneurs always are the engine to the economy. So as an entrepreneur, when I see the economy's bad, I say, okay, time to lace up my shoes and go to work because I get to create it. The only thing they're measuring is what I do anyway. So why are we letting the person with the thermometer tell me how the health is? Does that make sense?
It definitely makes sense. That's a different perspective than what we were taught in science class, social studies, and everything else in school, which, I mean, the education system is a whole other subject in itself.
It is. But then to answer the second question about the biblical economy, and this is where it gets really fascinating for believers. And it's something that I actually learned with Michael years ago. We were sitting together with some people from the Christian Chamber. So we see that Muslims come into a community, and with just 3% population, they can kind of take over and control the community. And to their credit, well done. I mean, you did something right, right? So with 3%, they take over a community. How do they do that? Entrepreneurship. The Muslim economy, a dollar will go hand to hand in that economy 14 to 16 times before it leaves the Muslim community and goes into the general American population. And that's how they're so powerful. In the Jewish community, that's 10 to 12 times inside that community before it will go into the general population. In the American Christian population, it's zero.
Wow, really?
Zero exchanges. Do we say, well, if I need grapes, is there a Christian store that sells grapes? Instead, we say, well, Walmart has a sale on grapes. And then we wonder why in Christianity, the economy, the biblical economy doesn't exist. And what we are seeing in churches across the country is actually an adverse effect. We have more Christians declaring bankruptcy than graduating college. 7,000 churches a year get foreclosed on. When it comes to divorce, that's an issue too. We'll maybe talk about that a little bit later. But you have tithing at all-time record lows. Why? If the Bible tells us to be in the world but not of it, then why are we suffering the consequences of the economy that the world is teaching us instead of forsaking the one that God prescribed? And that's the one we need to talk about because that's the one we got away from.
I completely agree. And I see that as a small business owner. Well, thankfully, we're no longer small. But as a business owner, I see that we try to support local businesses as much as we can. Like in our household, we avoid going to Walmart or any big chain as often as we can for anything that we're purchasing for that very reason, because we want people to support us and we're to lead by example. And so we try to go into the local community or local business and support them as much as we can. But I agree with you, that's a very good concept that I hadn't thought about as a Christian. How many times do we look for another Christian business to do business with?
Right. And as much as we love to say to these other communities, oh, shame on you, even if we look back in history, the Jewish population would get in trouble with the host country because what? They became economically prosperous, and everybody else was like, hey, how did you get all the money? Well, this is how they got all the money. They were entrepreneurs. And we used to teach that in this country. I have a textbook from 1929. It's a 7th grade textbook. And in 7th grade, we taught, 11, 12-year-olds? We taught them as soon as you graduate school, you start a business. That was the default career. Well, now it is completely the opposite, especially in church. So the world is telling us, go to school, go to college, get good grades, get a job. Then church is saying, go to school, go to college, get good grades, get a job. And then we wonder why we're suffering the consequences of massive employment. And then people come into church saying, help me. And we say, do the same thing the world said. Just slap a cross on it, you'll be fine. And then the non-believer says, well, why would I listen to you about anything if you don't understand how the worldly works? Which is exactly what Yeshua says. He says, if you don't understand the earthly, you're not going to understand the heavenly. So non-believers come into a church, whether it's a building or a small group, and they say, help me. And we tell them the same thing that the world told them.
It's no different.
It's no different.
And it's a real shame because we are supposed to be greater. We're supposed to be leaders. We're supposed to be the business owners. We're supposed to be kings and queens and heirs to the throne. And at very times, we don't act that way. Like you said, there's a lot of foreclosure going on right now. There's a lot of debt.
Right.
As a whole, as a population. I can only imagine that the Christian population is not exempt from that.
No. Matter of fact, it's almost emphasized because now when I go and speak at churches, they have kiosks in the lobby where you can just, put your tithe on a credit card. You can actually get into debt to tithe. Or worse yet, you have pastors that tell you to tithe your way out of debt. Well, where's that in Scripture? So as much as it hurts, and this is the funny thing about this topic, this issue hurts. There are going to be viewers right now that feel like I just kicked them in the gut, right? Well, what that hurt actually is conviction. It is the lie leaving your body. And they're going to yell things like, oh, it's not about money and you don't chase riches. We aren't talking about riches. We're just talking about who controls you. Do you control the money or does the money control you? And right now, the money is controlling the people. There's no way to flip it, spin it. We can't argue our way out of it. The money's controlling us.
And your first book, Quit Your Job or Die, which I love. I
Thanks.
honestly love it. It's fun to read, funny to read, and just an easy read. You made a point about that very topic in one of your first chapters on being controlled by money.
Right.
And how are we financially free? And how do we know? And most of us are not because we can't do what we want. Like you explained, you're not able to live the life that you want, spend the money that you want. It's still some kind of hindrance that's preventing you from that.
Yes. And interestingly enough, in the Bible, it talks about, God gives the power to create wealth. And a lot of pastors will stop right there, but there's a comma there and it continues. And as we know, there were no commas. So what does the rest of the sentence actually say? It says, I give you the power to create wealth as a sign of my covenant. Well, are we not still under a covenant? So how does this sign go away? But people, again, will want to reject that and say, well, it's not all about money. It's not all about money. I agree. It's not. But then stop working 40 hours a week for money. And this is where we get a little hypocritical. We love to say, well, money's not important. Then why do you leave the important things in life to go make it?
That's a good point.
And it's funny how the people who tell me that money's not important are the people without it. Every billionaire I've ever met says, Josh, I don't even think about money. Money at that point becomes like air. When you have enough of it, you don't think about it. But
I hope to get there one day.
You're on your way. But when you don't have any of it, it's the only thing you think about. And as pious as we want to sound, money's not that important. Well, as soon as your kid needs new shoes for school and you have to think, well, what do we cut in order to get them?
Yeah.
Money has become important. As soon as you have to have a water pump go out on the car, and because of that, you can't make it to go minister to somebody, money has become important. And what's almost just a stick in the eye, sort of hypocritical, is I went and spoke to a room full of men, Christian men. And I said, okay, men, how many of you have children? Oh, hands go up. If your daughter came home and said, Daddy, I'm in love, I want to marry this guy, what is the first question you ask him? How are you going to take care of my daughter? But I thought money wasn't important. Why does Jesus say, hey, when I come back with what? Mistos and apodidomai, payment, repayment. Wait a second, so why does he even say he's coming with something to give you? So we have to really grasp this and kind of put on our big boy pants, because the reason why faith is dying is because we have abandoned this issue. We've left it to people on the poverty or the prosperity gospel, and we've vacated that property, so to speak. So of course that's the only two whacked out messages they're hearing, and they're not hearing the truth. And my position is God would rather have you poor, living under a bridge and with your family, than employed 40 hours a week without them. So when people say, oh, are you preaching be rich? Not even close. What I'm preaching is stop letting money control you. I'd rather have you broke and in God's word as opposed to chasing money 40, 50 hours a week.
Now, there's a question I've got. It kind of relates to the whole, our churches are falling apart. Less and less people are going to church. You see that especially in Europe. Do you think there's any tie between that and then when you go to some Christian businesses that they don't get it? They think the people will just come to them because they're Christian, but they don't do a good job.
Right.
Is there some connection there where there's sort of a laziness that because we're Christian, it'll just happen and we don't have to try?
Yes, and that goes beyond just being Christian too. There's just a general laziness. We have become an internet-addicted sort of society. We think, well, all I need to do is create a Facebook page or a Twitter account and money cometh. No, you still have to be a skilled business person, which is why God says so much about being a business person. It's funny, quit your job or die is half the size of evangelpreneur. Evangelpreneur takes what God actually said about how to be a business person and puts it into context. So if we're going to study the skill set that Paul had, that Luke had, that Matthew had, that John had, that David had, well, that's a skill set that we used to teach in churches. We really did. We used to teach how to be an entrepreneur. Because everywhere west of Jamestown in this country, every church is the result of entrepreneurs. They knew it was important, and we've abandoned it.
So one thing that I want to share is, we came from Mexico. My family and I, we were immigrants, and we came with just clothes on our back, and we actually slept on my father's boss's floor for like 6 months when we first arrived, and then we moved into an apartment where we had no bed and shared a can of food. I mean, it was that intense. And what I'm getting out of all of this is about creating your destiny.
Yes.
And that's what my parents saw the struggle, and they said no more, and started their own business. Now with blood and sacrifice, a lot of hard work at the very beginning, but we've never been in need since. And that's how my husband and I, too, I mean, we own a business, and that's how it was ingrained in us. Both my husband's parents, both mother and father own their own business. That's just what we grew up with. We grew up with knowing and understanding that it's going to be a struggle, but it's worth it in the end because you have so much more freedom, not just financially, but you have freedom to take time off. You have freedom to go in late. You have freedom to go to your kid's recital if it's in the middle of the day. And freedom to, as you mentioned, talk on your phone. When you compared them to prisons.
Oh, yes,
when you compared jobs to prisons. I mean, there's so much more freedom that comes with just being a business leader.
Yeah. And what I like to point out, too, is the parable of the men with the talents, right? What happened to the guy that just buried it?
Nothing.
He was reprimanded. Not only was his taken away, but he was kicked out. He was punished. And his stuff was given to somebody else. Well, that's what we do. We say, money's not important, so I'm just going to bury it. I'm just going to work 40 hours a week, abandon wife and kids, and money's not important. Well, good luck with that. And why does Jesus continue to use parables of business owners? The laborers in the field. So again and again and again, he's teaching us something that we want to ignore. And when you talk about putting in that sacrifice, you're going to have to pay for it now or later.
Yes.
I'd rather put in the labor now and have the reward and live the biblical lifestyle as opposed to saying, well, you know what, money's not important, so let me abandon the biblical lifestyle and work for somebody else 50, 40 hours a week.
Which is half of, or more than half of the hours that you're usually awake. I mean, that's how much time you spend at work.
Yeah.
Believe me, I know, right, Scott?
Not to mention the commute on top of that. If you're having to go into some place and work, you're taking even more time.
Yeah, no, for a long time I drove an hour to work and an hour home. I mean, that's 2 hours a day, that's 10 hours a week. And I mean, our jobs here at A Rood Awakening, we see it very differently. We see it as a service unto Jehovah and unto the people.
Sure.
But nevertheless, I mean, you have to go out there and make your own destiny. Create your own life.
Yes, and one of the things that we have to clarify is somebody is going to say, well, I know entrepreneurs and they work even more hours than employees, only if they're doing it wrong. And that's what we have to teach. The reason why we see business owners working more hours than employees is because the entrepreneur is running his business as if he were an employee. They run it as, what do I do Monday through Friday? What service do I provide Monday through Friday? Well, then you're just a small business owner. You now become an employee of the thing you created. That's kind of like a Frankenstein scenario. And we've gotten away from working an entrepreneurship lifestyle. I tell people if you're working more than 30, maybe 35 hours a week in your business, you're doing it wrong. It's not that business doesn't work. You're not working your business correctly.
Wow.
That's very thought-provoking.
Yes, we're going to have to get into that in this series for sure. So now, you got me really thinking about that now. 35 hours a week as an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
Really
Why
happen.
would you say, think about this. Why would you say that all of these other things are more important than money? Yet all of those other things have to fit in the spare time that you have left over? Like, is that really how God did it? Did God say, hey, Moshe, before you lead these people out of Egypt, you have to go work 40 hours a week. So just lead them like a quarter mile a day and you'll get there in 40 years. Was that the plan? Or did he say, hey, I'm putting together an economic model that's going to sustain you in the wilderness so you can work it, well, they were trading, so you can work it whenever you need to engage in commerce. But other than that, you're going to do my will and my purpose.
I have a good question. So there's been a lot of opposition on this subject with Adam and Eve because Adam was cursed with tilling the ground. And that's their fighting argument, is that they were cursed to work. So is that true? I mean, is essentially work a curse? And if it is, then how is this contradicting that theology?
Well, we have to look at that and say, are we still living under a curse? Well, that's an interesting theological conversation, right? But even beyond that, it's how you work. You still have to put in hours, you still have to put in time, but you work smart instead of just hard. You say, hey, if I'm going to put in effort, how do I get the most yield? Any farmer would tell you this. Yep. I mean, the Bible tells us this. You know, hey, you cast this into the rocky soil, you're not going to get much. Cast it into the healthy soil, boom, it's going to multiply, right? So we need to do the same thing with our work. Am I doing something that's just going to pay me $20 an hour? If so, then I should never expect it to produce and yield great results. And instead, I say, well, Father, I threw my seed on terrible ground. Please bless it. He's telling you, I can't bless that. You threw it where you shouldn't have thrown it. So if you threw where you should, now one seed creates an entire stalk, which creates hundreds of more seeds. And that's how we're supposed to look at work. It's not that it's a curse. And it is. But it's not that the work part is the bad part. It's how do we address the work? And again, we think because we've been programmed since we start kindergarten, you have to do something 40 to 50 hours a week. Why? Where did that come from?
When did it start?
Well, okay, so I'll answer that. That actually did start someplace. And how we got a lot of that was when we had the Industrial Revolution in this country. Prior to that, school was reading, writing, arithmetic, a little bit of U.S. history, and then you were out by lunch. Well, along comes the Industrial Revolution, and you have these titans of industries approaching states saying, hey, I need just like my numb little employee people. Can you create somebody who can work in our factories? They're going to need to work from about 7:45 till about 4:45, because that's when my factory works. When do we go to school? So, and they need to learn a bunch of stuff. They don't really need to think. They just need to be able to replicate answers. So we went from a 7th grade textbook that taught us to start a business to now a 7th grade textbook that's this thick, and it's nothing but repetition, regurgitate the answer. So we create little employees. And because of that, when those little employees become business owners, they run their business as if they were an employee. So it's just it's a continuation of a problem that we are creating.
Interesting. I want to get back to that question after our break here. Right now, we are going to go to a break. We're going to come back with Josh in just a little bit here. But first of all, since we're talking about money, there's lots of people around here that help make Shabbat Night Live happen, and it doesn't happen without money. It's just a fact of life. And so we depend on you to keep Shabbat Night Live going. So if you are enjoying what you're seeing tonight, help us out, wouldn't you? Donate to roodawakening.tv/give, and we're going to give you 2 minutes to ponder that, and we're going to give you some other options to give tonight, and we thank you in advance for doing that. thank you for supporting Shabbat Night Live. Now, speaking of supporting, do we want to really support our school system the way it is this day and age? Because we were just talking about school, what kids learn in school before the break. And I know that I went to school, those hours, 8 to 3 or whatever it is, every day of my life. I went to normal school. And my kids have both been homeschooled, but they are far more entrepreneur-minded than I am. And they're racing ahead, and one's got a full scholarship to a university, and the other one's a budding entrepreneur. And I look at that kind of thing and go, oh, gee, that's too scary, and what if this and what if that? And they just go ahead with it. Is it because of the schooling I got, or what?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely it is. Because if you think about it, kids are naturally inclined to become entrepreneurs. You don't have to teach them how to do it. They figure it out on their own. They start trading baseball cards with their friends. Well, the baseball card becomes money. They learn how to do this all on their own because that's what God designed. God designed us to be entrepreneurs. Then we actually teach it out of them. So we teach them, oh, no, don't be an entrepreneur. There has to be a system. There has to be, go to school, get good grades. Well, there's a reason why even this past year, Vanderbilt University followed around a ton of valedictorians and salutatorians, second place people. You can tell I wasn't one of them. And they followed them around and said, okay, in 10 years, where do these people end up? And they found out that these people end up in a pretty precarious situation because they left school thinking there had to be a way to just replicate answers and keep getting rewards. Life doesn't work that way. And what they found was that A students work for B students work for C students manage the company that the D student owns. And your odds of becoming a millionaire are actually higher, no joke. Your odds of becoming a millionaire are actually higher if your grade point average was under 2.5. Because what you had to do is you had to get creative when it came to problem solving. You had to. In order to even get the D and get the diploma, you had to become creative. So now when you're in life and you have to pay rent, you automatically start to think, how do I get creative? And you start businesses. And it's such a powerful tool. And a great example of this and how we've lost it. So in 1929, like I mentioned, we had that textbook that taught kids, unless you were the dunce in the corner with the dunce cap on, you're going to leave and start a business. The dunce goes and becomes an employee. So we went from that to everybody's going to be an employee. Well, in the mid-'80s, when that generational switch is taking place, we're on the second generation of teaching everybody to become an employee, Legos almost goes out of business. And when you look at Legos, toy that's been around forever, they're thinking, well, they're still kids, why are we going out of business? And what they discovered was nobody's playing with them because we taught the kids to lose their imagination.
Wow.
So then there was this guy at the boardroom of Legos, and he says, well, tell you what, guys, before we close this puppy down, just give me a month or two. Let's treat them the way they're being raised. If parents are going to raise little employees, let's treat them like little employees. So they came up with the first Lego kit that was something. See, before you could just buy a tub of Legos and make whatever your little imagination desired. We lost our imagination, so they released the pirate ship. So now in this box, this is what this is, kid. Be an employee, follow the instructions, and that's your playtime now. Now if you go to a big box store, you cannot buy a tub of Legos. They're all kits because we're raising little employees, so now they're even playing like little employees. But when you homeschool kids, it's way different because now they're figuring things out on their own, and they have this natural tendency to want what God provided, which was entrepreneurship. And it's funny how Christians love to criticize this topic and say, well, I trust the Lord to provide. Great, but the Lord loves us more than he loves a sparrow, right? Well, a sparrow doesn't just get to sit in his nest and magically, poof, birdseed ends up in his gut. He has to go out and get what God provided. Well, entrepreneurship is that tool. That is how you go out and get what God provided. Because if you're an employee, the only thing you're getting is a portion of what God provided your boss. So then that leads into an entirely dark place where we realize not only are we teaching our kids incorrectly, we're living incorrectly, and the Bible tells us do not be unequally yoked. And we love to say, well, that has something to do with marriage, right? Oh, that's marriage. Yes, it applies to marriage, but as listeners and viewers of this show know, Michael goes a little bit more in depth in that and actually talks about yoke is a method of work. When you yoke two oxen together and they're not equal, one pulls ahead and breaks the neck of the other one. You actually kill the other ox. Well, okay, let's look at it from a work context. Let's say that I'm working for Anny, And just for example's sake, I say I'm the believer, money's not important, but I'm going to leave my wife for 40 hours to go make the non-important thing, and she's paying me. I am now yoked to her. What is she spending the money on? How many believers say, well, the Bible's important, yet never interviewed their boss to say, hey, boss, are you even a believer? Because think about it. If your boss is not a believer and they're spending money on drugs or prostitutes or whatever, then that means in order for me to pray to God and God, please bless me and give me a raise, my boss would have to be blessed by God, right? So God would have to bless my boss in his sin in order to give me a raise. Find that in Scripture. And this is what we're talking about when we talk about unequally yoked. But again, people are probably nervous in their seats and yelling at the TV right now because they're mad. And the reason they're mad is because it's the truth, and nobody likes the truth. But what do we know about the truth? It sets us free. So it's one of those painful topics that we have to talk about. And unfortunately, because we haven't, we've gotten to the place where we are.
No, I love this topic. You have no idea. Like I told you during the break, I have little happy emojis going on right now in my body because I just love the fact that we're addressing an issue that is ruining our lives as a whole, but as a people as well. It's crushing our dreams, our desires. Like you said, you feel fear when you're considering opening a business.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that's a common thought.
Right, but like Josh just explained, and that made me feel a whole lot better because it's going out and getting what God has already provided.
That's right.
So it's not, what if I can't get customers? What if? Never mind the what if. It's already there.
Right.
If you're a believer, it's intended for you, waiting for you.
And you can't tell me that God is with you in all things except business. So God is now your business partner. And there might be people say, well, yeah, but I had a business and it failed once. Employment is guaranteed to fail. There's no success option with employment because you only have 3 options. 1, you die. 2, you retire and get a pension that's never going to work. And if we had time, I could explain how no pension has ever kept up with inflation. Or 3, you get fired. So all 3 options, the only 3 options that are possible at your place of employment lead to failure. So when we see a business and they say, well, I tried that once and it failed, great, try again.
That's right.
Because at least this one holds the potential to succeed, whereas employment doesn't even have a shot. And then if you're going to be somebody who doesn't have the spirit of fear, but Spirit of God, then you have to start saying to yourself, well, then what am I actually afraid of? That he's not going to catch me? This is why he says, I'm a light unto your feet, not unto your path. Because he wants you to take a step right where you see your next step, and that takes faith. And that's what we don't want to do. If you look at most Christians, why don't you start a business? It's too risky. So you'd rather find security in your boss as opposed to security in your God? Good luck with that.
Now let's, if we may, could we get into the 4 types of people?
Absolutely.
This seems like a great opportunity. You sort of set the stage here. So there are 4 types of people, and that end up in employment or making money one way or another. You're either this one, this one, this one, or this one.
Yeah.
What are they, and how do we determine where we fit?
Well, here's the interesting part. When I went to my Strong's Concordance and looked for employee, I couldn't find it. So I needed to figure out, why isn't an employee in the Bible, right? It's not in the Hebrew, it's not in the Greek, it's not in the Aramaic. So when I started researching this, I realized there's only 4 types of people in the Bible: masters, laborers, servants, and slaves. Masters, we understand, he's the rich guy on top of the hill, got it. Slaves, we understand, don't have a choice, right? Because you're whipped or whatever, you don't have an option. But that leaves us with 2, servants and laborers. Servants were not slaves. Now, this is a very big distinction. We love to say that they're the same people. They're not. Now, before we get into what it is, we need to get a little bit of context. The book of Matthew tells us that you cannot serve God and money. Not that it's a sin or not that it's a nan and a boo-boo. It says you cannot do it. It's impossible. You'll either love one, hate the other, hate one, love the other. So you cannot do it, okay? Now that we know that, let's go back to what a servant is, because if it's telling us that we cannot be a servant to God and money, again, circle the action word. What are we doing? Hey, we're being a servant. So let's figure out what that is. A servant in biblical times, they started their shift when the master told them to. When do you have to go to work? When you want to, or when the master says? Mm-hmm. A biblical servant would work an 8 to 10 hour shift. They were not a slave. They worked an 8 to 10 hour shift. How many hours do you work? The servant didn't get to go home when the job was done. If there's time to lean, there's time to clean. There's always another project right around the corner, right? So the servant only got to go home when the master said it's time to go home. When do we get to go home from work? The servant, if he saved up enough money, he could buy his freedom. Today we call that retirement. Oh, honey, if I could just save up enough money, I can get free. If the servant loved his master enough, and Michael actually teaches this, if the servant loved his master enough, he could go to the city gate, put an awl through his ear, take his master's mark, and be his for life. Today, we call that tenure and pension. See, we are being servants to money through employment. And we love to say, I'm not a servant to money. Servant to money is one of those rich people and it rules their life. No, it's not. No servant had a lot. Kind of the clue that you were the servant was you were the guy without the lot, right? So this idea that we are serving money in our poverty, that's what you are doing in employment. You don't control you, which means you are being controlled by something else other than God, because God would rather have you with your wife and kids. Nobody can disprove that. So he would rather have you with your wife and kids, so you are being a servant to money. It doesn't mean you have a lot. And then the worst part of all, not only are we being servants to money in our poverty, but we're teaching our children to do so. What does the Bible say about those who teach the young ones the wrong way, right? What does it say? Better a millstone tied around your neck than to cause one of these to stumble. Holy cow. So in Matthew, it tells us you cannot be a servant to God or to money and God, right? And then it tells us that if we teach against what he's saying, it's better a millstone be tied around our neck. And then yet for 40 hours a week, we go do the very thing he tells us not to do. So that's a servant biblically. Now, a laborer was a little bit different. A laborer was like those dudes, the Bible doesn't use the word dudes, but the laborer was those dudes who were coming to the field after those other guys were already in it, right? Jesus uses this as a parable. And Yeshua says what? They're getting paid what you're getting paid. And he uses it as a parable, you know, the guy who gets saved near the end of his life goes to heaven, just like the guy who gets saved early on. Got it, great. But why did he use that parable? Why does he say that the workers and the laborers, why are there two different distinctions? Because one's a servant and one's an entrepreneur. As a laborer, an entrepreneur could say, hey, you need a field that needs to be plowed. I'll plow the field for X amount of money, and when the job's done, I'm out. And then you need fishing nets that need to be repaired, so tomorrow I'm expanding my skill set, fixing your fishing nets. I get to control my time. I get to control the hours I work. I get to spend time with my family. And if I want to save up and take 6 months off, I can, whereas a servant needs to save up enough money to buy freedom. So now the goal of freedom and being led by God is way closer than if I were a servant. And this is why he says, well done to you, good and faithful servant, because we're supposed to be his servants, not money's, which means we should be using money for his purpose. And that means if we're being employed to somebody for 40 hours a week, we're actually controlled by the boss's master, and who knows who he's serving.
So what is then the distinction between, because a laborer sounds to me like, okay, if you own a landscaping business, you are the owner of that landscaping business and your employees are the servants.
Sure.
So now who is the master in that kind of scenario?
Well, there's no master, there's just an employer.
Okay.
So now your master can be God, because now I'm only offering my services for a predetermined time, a predetermined rate, and a predetermined job. And people love to say, well, if that's the case, then who would fill the factories? Laborers. There is nothing legally stopping a factory from saying, hey, I want you to make 27 widgets. When you're done, go home. I just want 27 widgets. So we have been taught in our American mindset that, well, if roads are going to be built, if factories are going to be staffed, if stores are going to have workers, they're going to have to be employee workers. Lie. That is a lie from the devil. And it goes back to way in the beginning where he says, surely he didn't mean. Right? Because we are being led astray. We're being taught to be servants and saying, well, surely he didn't mean that's a servant. Good luck proving otherwise, because that's exactly where we are. And you can twist scripture any way you want it, but at the end of the day, let's just be honest. You're not giving as much to ministry, not because you don't want to, because you can't. You're not giving your family the education that they deserve, not because you don't want to, but because you can't. Anybody, see, this is where we get kind of messed up with this. Anybody will say, well, money's not important. Okay, then just do a simple experiment. Go find your fellow believer who didn't watch this program. First, tell them they need to watch the program. But beyond that, ask them, if you were to get a 10% raise at work, what do you do with it? All of them will say something like, Oh, I'll buy a new TV, get new trucks for or new tires for the truck, or whatever. Me, I. I thought money wasn't important. Then let about a week go by and say, hey, pretend you had a rich uncle who just kicked the bucket, left you a bunch of money. What do you do with it? Oh, I'd build a homeless shelter for vets. I'd get a private nurse for my mom so she doesn't have to get into a home. Well, wait a second. Now that you have more than enough, you're not greedy? See, this is how we've twisted it. We've actually convinced ourselves that if I get more than I need, then I'm greedy. What? If you get more than what you need, that's when you actually can start giving. You can't give until you have excess, which is why the parable of the woman with the 2 widows' mites is such a powerful parable. Because people have to say, well, look, she was poor and she gave. She was actually wealthier than over 90% of this country. Because what do we know biblically? If she was in debt, she'd be in debtor's jail. Mm-hmm. So she wasn't in debt. So even though she only had 2 widows' mites, 90% of this country is in debt. So that woman was actually in a stronger financial position with excess than most people watching this program. But yet we've twisted and lied to ourselves. And we said, oh, well, I'm doing better because I can charge it and I can get a mortgage. And where are any of these things in Scripture? The Bible tells us do not be the debtor. Yet, what do we do with our churches? Well, we need a new church. Let's go get a mortgage. What? He would rather have you poor teaching under a fig tree than to have a church that's in debt. Yet we don't see that. And then we wonder why we have the problem. And instead of addressing the problem, people are going to yell at me and say, oh, well, how dare you? But they can't yell too often because they got to go to bed to make sure they're up for work in the morning.
Go ahead.
I was going to share, that was our goal. My husband and I's goal in 2017 was to completely get out of debt. So, and I can say that we are, which is a huge accomplishment. I mean, 100%, because we felt that way too, was you're not supposed to be the debtor, which we got ourselves in there. But I mean, we're just utterly grateful that we have that financial freedom at this point to say that we're debt free and hopefully never get back into debt.
And that brings us to our next question. The thought is then that, well, because we have all these twists in our thinking, that right now we think, well, entrepreneurship is for those special few that have those special skills, and if you have the right luck, maybe you'll make it. But you say entrepreneurship is for every family.
Yes, every single family. I don't care if you're from Yale or jail. I don't care if you're white or black. I don't care if you're handicapped or it doesn't matter. Entrepreneurship is actually the great equalizer. I said this last time that I was on with Michael, and it's a great example. The first female millionaire in this country, not only was she a female, which is hard enough, she was a black woman in the 1800s. So you start thinking, well, how is that even possible? She was an entrepreneur. That entrepreneurship equalizes things. We had black landowners, we had black slave owners, but they were entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurship, regardless of where you're at, is always the great equalizer. And it gives you the ability to keep up with inflation. Inflation has been 10% every year since 1871. Documented it in the book. It's been a 3-time Amazon #1 bestseller. Never been discredited. It has been 10% every year on average since 1871, which means if you are an employee who gets a 4% cost of living increase, you went backwards 6%. And if you don't believe me, just look up the dollar index. Prove I'm wrong. Look it up right now. And if you looked it up today, like I did before we came out here, your dollar is worth 6% less than it was at the start of last year. So automatically, you just lost 6% there, even if everything I said was wrong. So you need to get to this point where we start saying to ourselves, what are we doing? Let's say somebody watching disagreed with everything. Fine. But why are you going to work for money and abandoning the things that are supposed to be more important? You can't spin that. And that's why it's for every family. It allows you the opportunity to keep up with inflation, and it allows you the at least potential to get beyond where you are right now. And I'm not saying if you're a servant to money, you're sinning. That's between you and God if you have the option to get out. But my point is everybody has the option to get out. People tell me all the time, oh, well, there's so much regulation. How can somebody be an entrepreneur in today's America? Folks, you can be an entrepreneur in prison. If you've ever known anybody who's been to prison, not yourself, wink, wink, but if you've ever known anybody else who's gone to prison, there's somebody in there that can get you a girly magazine, pack of cigarettes, cell phone, drugs, whatever, right? If that person can be an entrepreneur in an 8x8 steel box under 24-hour surveillance, don't tell me you can't be. And when we talk about things like the mark of the beast and you can't buy or sell without the mark, guess what the only thing God can use to help you around that system is? Entrepreneurship. Because it's going to be the black market at that point, but it's still a form of entrepreneurship that he's going to use in order to get you past the mark of the beast system.
So how does someone choose then? You say, okay, great, you got me fired up now. What do I do? What skill, how do I choose what skill I have to turn into a business? How does someone decide that?
Well, step one is you don't go to where you think you would knee-jerk go. Knee-jerk reaction is to start a business in something you know, like, or desire.
So I can't own my vineyard? Because that's my next goal.
Not if it's the business that you're hoping that just gets you free. I had a guy tell me once that, Josh, can you help me start a business? I said, sure. What do you want to do? Well, I want to own a bed and breakfast. I said, great. Do you have $300,000 that I don't know about? He says, well, no. I said, well, then don't do it. Well, see, I knew it took money to make money. No, it took money to own a bed and breakfast. And that's where we kind of get this picture wrong. When I ask them, what business do you want to start? They always tell me something that they desire, the passion, the end goal business, maybe the vineyard. But that's not where you start. You start at what can I start today with what I have that gets me out of employment. And everybody can do that. I've helped homeless people do it. I've helped 94-year-olds do it. I've helped people in wheelchairs do it. It doesn't matter. Everybody can start that sort of business because it's not limited by what just you can do. You start getting involved in real entrepreneurship, and in some cases, you don't provide the labor at all. You just provide the facility or the training or the space or the computer or something that allows the engine to run. And for that, you get a part. And sometimes you just start with a part. But a little bit is better than nada, right? And that little thing can grow because now you have something that God can bless. And it's amazing how entrepreneurship has been such a blessing. And I'm not a theologian. Like somebody's going to say, well, it was actually, this verse instead of Matthew. That's not the point. The point is, from an economic standpoint, I do know what we're talking about. And where we find ourselves is a very perilous position. And as long as Christianity goes down this path of blind employment, we are going to continue to suffer.
Well, I'd like to know your opinion on where is our economy today? It's a new year. It's 2018. What can we expect?
Well, let me put on my little hat and make a prediction, right? I think what we're going to see is we're going to see a rise in alternative currencies because people are realizing, hey, wait a second, the American economic system is based on a bubble. Mm-hmm. Nobody's denying that the stock market right now is a bubble. It's overvalued.
Yes.
Even though everybody's happy and yay, record numbers, it's still overvalued. I mean, when you have Tesla, a company that I like, but when you have Tesla that is valued higher than General Motors, who is actually selling way more cars, there's a bubble. And it is going to correct itself. So you're going to see a rise of alternative currencies. Some are hour-based, some are crypto-based, but there's lots of them. You're going to see a rise of that. You're also going to see a call for more massive employment, which is always a bad sign. I don't care how people vote politically, but when both parties are saying, hey, we want to be the party of bringing mass employment back and jobs, that can only consume an economy. No economy can last more than 3 generations if it's based on employment. We are now in that 3rd generation. So what I would say is that the people watching this program and reading their scriptures are going to have to look for a godly solution. And that godly solution is to start creating a culture, which is something we don't have. Christians look no different than non-Christians, right? Mm-hmm. So we'll create our own culture, and in that, start creating our own economy too. And we see it throughout cultures. I mean, I was just meeting with one of our associates who is from India. And he says, well, in India, we don't have to go to the banks. We have what's called a chitty. And a chitty is where they have people in their community all pour into a pot. Let's say everybody pours in $1,000. So now there's $50,000 in a pot. So now we have $50,000 to start business 1. Now next month, we have $50,000 to start business 2. And he says, this is why my culture has so many entrepreneurs. This is why you don't see a lot of us working at the stores for 10 to 20 hours, $20 an hour. We're all starting businesses. So we have to get to that. And that, if we see that in 2018, it's going to be a good year.
That's actually very common in the Latin American community as well. So I've actually done it a handful of times with me and 10 other people. When we do it for 10 months, we all commit to $1,000. And at the end of it, you get $10,000. It's a huge chunk of money that you can do whatever you want with. So,
and that almost brings to light the the wrong thinking we have in America about independence.
Yes.
Everybody being independent. We're not independent. We need to be interdependent, where everyone puts something in so that we can all benefit eventually.
Well, and that's why God created tribes. I mean, you have to remember when Israel wanted a king, he actually said, don't do it. Don't do the king thing. Don't do it. He created tribes, and tribes work exactly like that. And that's why we see cultures who come into America are so successful when they stay tribal. They stay tribal on purpose, and it allows them to thrive. And we need to get back to that. Instead of arguing about, well, I love my job. Well, stop it for a second. Even if you do, which I disagree with, but even if you do, what are you doing to promote the culture, your beliefs? I mean, for goodness sakes, you referenced the comparison I made in the book. In prison, they give you a Bible. Well, in all 50 states, you're not supposed to take a Bible to work. So tell me again how this is what you love so much. We have to get back to that cultural, tribal society and use entrepreneurship to our advantage.
Thank you, Josh. Well, you know what? Time's up for this episode, but come back because we're not done here in the least. So we're going to come back, and next time we're going to talk about the meaning of life, and that is where we're going to start our next episode of Shabbat Night Live. Until then, we thank you, Josh, for being with us, and thank you, Annie, for asking all those great questions, and I can't wait to learn more, and I bet you can't either. So until then, until next week, we'll bid you shalom, shavua tov, and we'll see you next time on Shabbat Night Live.